This time we're discussing the possible expansion of the college football playoffs, moving to a possible 12-team format. So what this would mean is that the bracket would include 6 of the highest ranked conference champions and then 6 remaining champions as determined, or 6 remaining highest ranked teams as determined by a selection committee. So Kelly, what do you think about this new move, about this expansion? Do you like the possibility of this? Do you dislike the possibility of this? Give me your thoughts, Kelly. Not Dylan, only Kelly.
First of all, I just want to point out, I feel a little bit like a child of divorce right now. I can't understand really what's going on, but I'm just going through it. But back to the more relevant conversation at hand, I think this is a very interesting change, and it's one I didn't see coming, because this is a governing body that doesn't make drastic changes, and when they do, it takes a very long time for them to do so. But there's a lot of questions here, but for me, overall, it's a good thing. I think, especially for Group of 5 conferences, the American Athletic Conference, Conference USA, the MAC, Mountain West, Sun Belt, they are going to have an opportunity to have a seat at the table, and that's what they've been asking for a long time. I mean, you look at number 8 Cincinnati from this past year, number 12 Coastal Carolina. They would have had a chance to get into the field as conference champions ahead of producers Alex Wolf's team, number 25 Oregon. So it gives these other teams a better chance. And I think anytime you open the door up for more teams to be involved in the postseason, I think that's just better overall for the sport and for football and for fans of those teams that maybe haven't gotten as many chances. I mean, there's always been an access problem in college football. When you get towards the playoff, it's pretty much the same teams year in, year out. And so for me, I think that's one reason why this could be a good thing.
Well, first off, Kelly, I want you to know, I know it's strange, but it's not your fault, okay?
Yeah, this has nothing to do with you, Kelly. We didn't mean to involve you in our
this
problem.
is between Kayla and me. But so anyways, I'm all for expanding the college football playoffs. I was perplexed that they only started with 4. That never made too much sense to me. 12 seems like a good enough number for now, I guess. I see no reason why they couldn't have done 16, but that's okay. But for me, at least, if I read the proposal correctly, is that they wanted conference champions to get a bye past the first round, no matter where they were ranked nationally. Meaning, like, I saw someone bring up the example the other day on Twitter where, let's say you look at Notre Dame's undefeated regular season of 2012 before they met Alabama in the national championship. They were the number 1 team in the country. They would not have gotten a bye because obviously they're not in a conference. And teams that were ranked well below them would have gotten a bye past that first round. Now, one might argue that that's just a way to try and convince Notre Dame to join a conference. But, regardless, there are issues here. And I also think another important issue is that I think there are people in college football that think that expanding the playoffs are going to fix their disparity issue. That's going to fix the Alabama, Ohio State, maybe one other team every once in a while, and then everybody else issue. This is not going to solve that. All it's going to do is just give those other teams more games to play. Now, there's no problem with giving other teams the national exposure that, most basketball programs will get during March Madness or something like that. But if you really want to go about fixing the issue of why are Alabama and Ohio State winning all the time, and Clemson, I'm forgetting Clemson. This is not the way of fixing that. So I'm all for an expanded college football playoff, but if they want to solve that problem, it's going to be a little bit harder than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, it does create more meaning for some of these teams, like, later on in the season. It's not like, okay, we know, like, come November, who's going to be in these, like, in the playoffs, Like, I think it does kind of create keeping the fans sort of interested longer, because there is still some more, like, possibility, some leeway, a little bit of, like, suspense in who the 12 will be. But like you said, Dylan, I mean, it pretty much doesn't really touch anything actual. And, like, the SEC still is going to, like, reign supreme, even though they're going to have a lot of different conferences maybe in this playoffs. It doesn't really seem like it's going to, like, touch the main issue of championships. Like, I just think that while this is good, and I think it gives more exposure to a couple little teams, and I think that it keeps maybe fans more interested because some seasons are now still relevant later on. Like, come the playoffs, like Dylan has said, and it hurts to agree, but I just don't think that it's going to really touch anything in the long run. So, like, it'll be fun for these guys to be in the playoffs, but, like, do any of them have a legitimate chance? Probably not, you know?
Right. I think that's definitely a fair point. I mean, if you look, I think I read an article somewhere that if this system had been in place for the past 7 years, over half the bids would have gone to the SEC and Big Ten. So, like you mentioned, maybe not a large difference. Yes, it would give some teams an opportunity to be in that playoff picture where they may not have otherwise gotten it. But you're right. These other conferences, these SEC, Big Ten, they're so massive and they have so much power in college football that they would just have more teams in the playoff. But there's some other interesting things to look at this potential setup. Injuries is one thing. This would put some teams in a situation where they're playing 16 or even 17 games in a season, and these are college athletes who aren't getting the same level of nutrition, sleep, and attention that professional athletes who play that same amount of games are getting. So you have those kind of questions, and like we mentioned with softball earlier, there's already questions where you draw the line between an amateur athlete and a professional athlete, and I think this is going to bring more of those questions, especially should a player get injured playing 17 games in a season. So there are those questions. I do like your, I'm not sure, I don't remember which, I think Kayla, you made this point. It does add more emphasis.
It was definitely me.
Well, no. I mean, maybe it could have been me.
I really don't want to take sides, but you mentioned a point about how these games later on the season will have more emphasis, and I think one thing that will benefit is conference championship games, because I believe in this potential playoff, if you win one, you get a first round playoff bye, and that could be really big for some teams. So maybe just having more emphasis in those conference championship games. I mean, I can think, not off the top of my head, but I know there's been a few games where a team in a conference championship game somehow got lucky almost and made it to that championship game and could have had the opportunity to upset the favorite, and then they would find themselves with a bye in the first round of the playoffs. So that could put a lot more emphasis on those conference championship games, which is not only better for the teams and the players, but also for the fans, for students at those games, for the colleges themselves to host a conference championship game and have it mean something. That's definitely going to help. It's not going to hurt revenue for sure. So I think there's still a lot they can weed out here and figure out. Notre Dame's a big question. What are you going to do with Notre Dame? Like that's a huge question they're going to have to answer. But I can see positives and negatives. I can see both sides.
Kelly, it's actually, at least for me, it's almost something I forget to think about is what you bring up is the health issues for players, because I think there's a lot of people in the sports world, myself included most of the time, that like love the idea of college football where it's all of these teams and having a playoff for 120 teams or whatever it is just so is very mathematically stimulating and exciting. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think there's like, I remember when I was like 13 or 14, I tried to go about fixing the problem myself and realigning the conferences and creating a tournament. And you know what? I must say it was pretty good. But then I showed it to, I think it was I showed it to my dad, and he was like, these are college players. I was like, are like, this is too much emphasis here. Too much emphasis on the championship. And I was like, oh, you know what? He's absolutely right. He's completely right. So that's something that I think sports fans tend to forget about, is that, it's one thing to be in a 16-team tournament, as I mentioned earlier, but you got to pass Spanish, so there's a levity there that needs to be remembered.
I mean, yeah, I think that's also something that I forget about though too. Like, as not being a collegiate athlete, I forget about the actual like wear and tear physically that's going to take on your life, and that toll is really going to leave on you. So in theory, to me, as a viewer, as a fan, I like the idea, but I understand that perhaps as an athlete, maybe it's not entirely the most fun thing for you guys to also be going through,